I got a call and I rushed to the hospital, but by the time I got there, he was gone. There's a lot I could say about those early days and weeks and months. But the part that's most relevant to this story is that I was in no condition to be doing anything of any substance. I couldn't make decisions. I couldn't read more than a paragraph. I couldn't think. It was a really tough time. And that made it really challenging to tackle the absolute mountain of administrative work that comes with any death. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, everyone. Thank you especially to Stephen for making space for what is rather a difficult topic. I really appreciate that we can talk about these things openly with this group. So I'm here to talk about these things: love and loss and grief and money and some of the intersections between all of them. I also want to give you a little disclaimer right up front here. I'm here to talk about money because this is a money-minded audience, but my husband's death was not about money. And I hope that's very obvious to everyone, but I just ask that, these financial details exist and they are relevant and I want them to be helpful, but they are so far from the totality of the story. And I just ask you to please keep that in mind as we go forward. So the first thing I'm going to tell you about is a fight. 3 days before my husband died, we had a fight and I slept on the floor of my home office. We were literally millionaires by this point. We had achieved 5 more than a year prior, and we let a $350 disagreement about a cat ultrasound rob us from spending one of his last nights on Earth together. Now, to be honest, if not for what happened later, I doubt that I would remember this fight at all. Very thankfully, we woke up early the next morning. We made up. We apologized. We had a heart-to-heart. We charted a path forward for our kitty that felt manageable to both of us. And we went on with our lives with, honestly, a newfound appreciation for where our relationship had brought us. We could resolve conflicts like this efficiently and compassionately and be stronger for them. Now, to rewind a little bit, about 6 years before that fight, in 2015, I found Pete's blog, Mr. Money Mustache, online, and I was floored. Oh my gosh, can this be true? It seems kind of crazy. I start running some numbers. I start getting my husband involved, and we got to be really, really excited. So those final months of 2015 for us were really spent crunching the numbers, fleshing out our spreadsheet, making a timeline, and saying, we can do this. We can retire early. This is going to be amazing. So at the stroke of midnight on 2016, January 1st, we were okay, we're all in. We cut back everything. We cut back dining out. We cut back home improvements. We cut back new clothes. We cut back gifts. We cut back charitable contributions, which pains me to say that now. And by the end of that year, December rolls around and we're reflecting and we're doing our accounting and we're we have this great big pile of money. We maxed out all of our tax advantage accounts and then some. But also it really wasn't that fun. We were able to look back and be a lot of parts about this year really sucked. So how do we course correct from here? In 2017 and through 2020, we were successful in doing that. We found a much better balance. Yes, we maxed out all those same accounts before. Yes, we were still putting money in brokerage, but also we were traveling. We went to Paris. We, pulled up stakes, not once, but twice. First from Michigan to San Francisco, then from San Francisco to Longmont. So we would not have been able to do those things if we were still living in that 2016 deprivation mindset. So 2020 comes around, and then in the middle of that year, we hit our number. And it was this amazing thing that kind of happened slowly and then all at once. And that led us to this question of what are we going to do now? What do we want now that we no longer have to work? For me, that meant going back to school. I enrolled full time with the intention of achieving a master's degree in English so that I could teach at community college throughout retirement. It's kind of a here and there kind of job. For Phil, that meant that he wanted to actually stay where he was. He had just started with a company where he felt he had finally found the boss and the team and the work culture that he had been searching for his entire career. and he was not ready to give that up yet. So he decided to keep going. Now, aside from FI, this is a little bit about how we did money. In the beginning of our marriage, we actually had quite separate finances. But as time went on and we were either selling or buying real estate, we were moving things around, that began to make less and less sense. But we still had a lot of separate accounts floating around, joint credit cards. We co-owned our house on the title, but his was actually the only name on the mortgage. Because when the day came to actually apply for that mortgage, I had a class. And I didn't have any on-paper income anyway. He did. So it was like, all right, fine. That's no big deal. You do the application. I handled most of our bills. The utilities were in my name. The car was in my name. All the insurances. But when it came to FI and future planning, right from the very beginning, from that 2015 mark on the timeline, we always viewed that as a together picture. There was not, this is what Amy will have in retirement, and this is what Phil will have in retirement. It was, these are all of our assets, and this is how much money they're collectively going to generate for us when we retire. On September 15th, 2021, Phil and I went out to lunch. We actually both had other places to be that day. It was a Tuesday. He was supposed to be at work. I was supposed to be working on a paper. But it was a really beautiful day. And he was leaving later that afternoon to go on a bike camping trip in the mountains with a friend. So we went to this place near our home. They had a great patio and a great menu. And we're sitting outside and we're having this lunch. Or we had ordered our lunch, and the lunch was taking a really long time to arrive. And what ended up happening is we had one of those true gut check conversations on our entire life together. It was like, how are we doing? And we had these conversations once or twice a year. Many of you probably do too. It's like, how are we doing? How are you? How am I? Are you happy? Am I happy? Are we doing this right? Did we make the right choice to move here? Are we on the right path? Do we need to change things? And very happily, I can say that the result of that conversation was, we're great. Like, we are so happy with where we were. I was super happy in my academic career. He was super happy at work. We were super happy we had landed in Longmont. We loved the home that we had found. We were just starting to kind of make it our own. And this fuzzy was floating by. And he plucked it out of the air, and he held it up, and he commented, as he very often did, about all the ways he admired nature's elegant systems for growth and survival. And I took this photo, and it turned out to be the last photo taken of him alive. The next morning, he was on his way back from that bike camping trip when he lost control of his bicycle, and he flew off and he struck a guardrail with his head and his neck. I got a call and I rushed to the hospital, but by the time I got there, he was gone. There's a lot I could say about those early days and weeks and months, but the part that's most relevant to this story is that I was in no condition to be doing anything of any substance. I couldn't make decisions. I couldn't read more than a paragraph. I couldn't think. It was a really tough time. And that made it really challenging to tackle the absolute mountain of administrative work that comes with any death. And there was also something that was weighing really heavily on me during this time. And it was something that I learned just a handful of days after Phil had died. Before we get to that, also in the mix, of course, we have all of these new money fears. So there's a loss of income, right? Yes, we were financially independent, but because he had still been working, we'd been living off of his paychecks. Now I was thrust into this sudden drawdown scenario that I had no idea how to handle. And I was also handling all money decisions alone. He was the person who did the money in our relationship. I kind of knew what was going on, but not to the extent that he did, not anywhere close. So now it was this very sad and lonely feeling of basically, holy shit, what the hell am I going to do here? And there were also new threats in the mix. And I know that sounds like a really dramatic word. So what is this new information that was weighing on me? Well, it was this. If you're married and you die without a will, it is not necessarily true that all of your assets or estate will go to your surviving spouse. This was an enormous, jarring surprise to me. I had no idea this could be the case. So, wait a second, why didn't we have a will? Let's talk about that. I'd actually brought it up many times in conversation. We're starting to accumulate all these assets. It's feeling a little irresponsible of us to not have something in place. What if we die in a plane crash or something? Nobody's going to know what to do. No, who even would get this? We had no idea. And Phil would kind of brush it off. He would say that, it's expensive. You have to pay for an attorney. It can cost thousands of dollars. We don't need this. We're married. If one of us dies, we're totally fine. What is the likelihood that we're really both going to die at the same time? That was so small that we just were like, okay, we're not going to think about that. After his death, of course, when those things didn't turn out to be true, when our marriage did not protect us, and also when it turned out that we did not have our beneficiaries designated correctly, which we thought we had, I was super ashamed, which is how I chose this graphic here. It felt like we'd been caught out. We'd been so wrong about these really important things. And now I was the only one left to deal with the fallout. It was a terrible feeling. So what does it mean when you die without a will? They call this dying intestate. And it means a couple of things. It means that your estate is going to go through probate. So now the legal system, the court system is involved in, the death of your loved one. And it also means that your assets are going to be distributed according to your state's intestate succession laws. This is very different from state to state. So I encourage you all to look up what it means in your state. But for us, in Colorado, as a childless couple, that meant that as his spouse, I would receive the first $300,000 plus 75% of what was left. And that Phil's parents were legally entitled to that remaining 25%. Now, just a quick back of the envelope kind of example here. If the estate assets were around $1 million, this math would mean that I would get $825,000 of it, and his parents would get $175,000 of it. That's a really big piece, right? We're not talking about a rounding error here. When we think about our FI numbers and what we need, this is this can be a really big chunk. So I just want to underline that here. Now, when I learned this, my mind went lots of places, but one of them was definitely, just because they're legally entitled to this, I didn't think they were actually going to take it, right? His parents, we had good relationships. They were long divorced. They lived many states apart. They also had really different financial situations between them, but sort of no matter how you sliced this, I could not in my mind come up with any sort of scenario where this could possibly be justified. So what I decided to do was to have a difficult conversation with one of the parents, the one that I felt closer to. So I sat down with that parent and I said, look, you're going to get this letter in the mail from the Boulder County Court. And this is essentially what it's going to say. And I want you to know that we had no idea this could happen. And we expected that if one of us dies, everything would come to the other. And basically, Phil did not will you this money. This was not a gift he gave you. This is essentially a clerical error on our part. It was an error that we had made. And that parent looked at me and they said, Amy, I want what Phil would want. And you're the best person to know what that is. So if you think this money should stay with you, then that's what I want too. And I was so relieved. So that was in October. About 6 weeks later, my attorney let me know that they had been contacted by an attorney that parent had retained. And basically that initial message said, we don't really feel like we have all the facts. We want some more information here. We want to know how much is in this estate. I did not have a legal way to prevent them from getting that information, so we sent it along. And a couple weeks later, we got word that the parents were now teaming up. They were sharing that attorney and that they were going to take this money. So that led to a long and painful legal journey. There was a lot of betrayal and anger feelings swirling around in me. I felt betrayed by my in-laws, not only that they were betraying me, but that they were betraying their son, my husband, and it felt horrible. I was angry at them. I was angry at the legal system. And I was also angry at Phil for having left me in this position. What this meant ultimately was more loss. We had all already been through this cataclysmic loss that nobody could have predicted. And by taking this money, not only were they taking the money and that was a loss, but it also meant that they were making it so that I couldn't have a relationship with them. Now, I guess you could argue different sides to that, but I did not personally feel that there was a way that I could continue having them in my life after they made this decision. And of course, the whole thing, it just prolonged the trauma. My own grieving and healing process was very much impacted. Every time an email would arrive from my attorney, my heart rate would spike. It was an awful scenario. So in the end, his parents walked away with well over 6 figures of our money. I had to pay over $20,000 in legal fees, and the case dragged on for 2 years, 3 months, and 24 days. And yet, there was and still is a lot to be grateful for. So first on my mind is that Phil did not suffer. He was literally doing something he loved right up until the last moments of his life. And I think very few people can say that, and I feel very grateful for that. The support of family and friends, old and new. There were actually a lot of surprises here. Some of the people in an event like this that you think are going to show up are nowhere to be found. And some of the people that you barely know at all are the ones that are really carrying you. So there was a lot to be thankful for, including my Longmont community. We had only lived there less than a year and a half at that point, and there were ways that they stepped up and honestly continue to step up that continue to amaze me. For financial independence, obviously, this meant a huge number of things that was helping me in this aftermath. I didn't have to go back to work. That was incredible. I have many widowed friends now, and many of them had to be back at work within a couple of weeks. I can't imagine that kind of scenario. It also meant that I had money to stay where I was. I did not have to sell my house or uproot my life or otherwise alter my circumstances in any ways beyond what had already occurred. And it meant that I had the financial resources to pay for things that were helpful in my grieving process, like lots and lots of therapy. I was on the twice-a-week plan for a while. Highly recommended if you have a traumatic event in your life. But also things like travel, which became a coping mechanism for me. There were times when I could not stand to be in my house, and I would literally get on the computer and I would book a flight and I would drive to the airport 2 hours later because I just could not be in that setting anymore. There were also changes that I made to my house. I moved out of the bedroom into my home office. I painted things. I moved stuff around. I had the money to do those things. And they were actually a huge, huge help so that I could make a space that did not remind me around every corner and every turn of my husband who was no longer with me. And lastly, I was so grateful that we had ultimately eventually found balance in our financial independence journey. When I look back at 2016 and that year of deprivation, where we succeeded in piling up tons and tons of money, but where we did like almost nothing fun, I'm so glad that was not our life at the moment of his death. I cannot imagine how I would feel if we had this enormous nest egg that we never actually touched together because we were waiting for some mythical future date that never would have arrived in our case. So let's talk about planning ahead. The first thing I want to tell you is that the planning you do in advance of your death is not for you. It is a gift you are giving to your loved ones so that in the event of your passing, they are in the best position possible. In the wake of your death, they are not going to be operating at their best. Critical thinking and decision-making are going to be really, really difficult. So the things that you can do now in advance to make it easier for them are crucial. And I hope you all do them. So what does that actually mean? This is how you can protect your heirs and loved ones. Firstly, a will or a trust. These are robust legal instruments designed to make sure that your wishes are carried out. You should have one in place. You can also talk about death. You can talk about it often and clearly and openly. This is something that will happen to all of us. If you have particular wishes, if you want to be composted, if you want your ashes to be shot up into space somewhere, I encourage you to do that type of research in advance because asking someone to do that after your early and shocking demise is a really tough ask. Make sure your beneficiary designations are correct. Many people don't know this, but they actually supersede a will. If you have a will that says, I want all of my assets to go to my spouse, and you have an old 401k from an employer that has your ex-girlfriend from before you were married, she's the one that's going to get that. So you need to make sure these are correct. You should audit them regularly and be detailed about it. And the last thing I put up here is to simplify. The more complex your financial life is, the more difficult it's going to be for your loved ones to handle in the event of your death. I know we all get sucked in by this, like, oh, this credit card here, sign up and get this bonus and open this account over here and move $50,000 over for a $250 bonus. Yeah, like those exist and they're there, but I encourage you to give some measure of thought to, are those incentives really going to make a difference to your bottom line 10 years from now? And if they're not, is it really worth it? After you die, somebody is going to have to find all of your accounts and figure them out. So something to keep in mind as you're doing your own planning. So as you're deciding how to proceed, this is what I'd like to leave you with. The story that I tell myself about my husband and our marriage and our money changes depending on the day. Some days, the bad days, it's that he was cheap and he was inconsiderate. And that's why we had a fight about a cat ultrasound. And that's why we didn't have a will or a trust. And that's why his parents got to walk away with our money. And that's why I can't have them in my life anymore. Other days, thankfully, the majority of days, the story is that he was generous and he was brilliant. And he left behind a financial legacy that I'm doing my best to honor even after his parents ripped away their peace. So as you're making your plans, as you're choosing either to act or not, I encourage you to consider what type of story you would like your spouse or loved ones to carry when the day comes that they will need to move forward without you. Thank you.